recorded.
Hi, good evening, everybody. I'm delighted to be here with James Rollins, with whom Poison Pen has had a long and really fruitful and delightful relationship.
It has. It's been now going on probably a decade and a half, I think now.
Something like that. Jim has been here unfailingly with all of his books, but I would like to say before we start talking about The Last Odyssey, I want to give a real shout out to Jim. Not every author is willing to put himself through as much as Jim has put himself through we're recording this before publication date, so even though this is going to seem live to you, we actually recorded it a while back. He's really made an effort to fly down here and sign hundreds of books for his fans and do this talk, and we did a podcast, and I think you've gone the last mile for your fans, kiddo.
It feels that way.
It really does, and it reminded me, or made me sad, that you've never been my veterinarian, because you had the same level of care for your patients.
And I did. I still always tell people I'm a better veterinarian than I am an author. You know, I was a better veterinarian.
What standard are you using to say that?
I just my clinic was very successful. I still get emails from my clients from, again, probably a decade and a half ago when I finally retired from full-time practicing. I'm an excellent surgeon. I don't mind bragging a little bit.
You're an excellent surgeon.
Yes.
That's really a useful skill.
So, yeah.
But why are you writing if you were so good as a veterinarian?
Well, I had been a veterinarian for 15 years, so it wasn't like I was briefly a veterinarian. So I went from being an employed vet to having my own clinic for about a decade. And so when I started writing, it was new, it was novel, it was different. It was you know, not the day in, day out of owning and operating a clinic, which is pretty much it's a 12, 14, 16-hour day as a veterinarian. It's usually 7 days a week. In the 10 years I owned my practice, I took exactly 2 weeks total of vacation over those 10 years. So I was ready for a break. I didn't think the break would be quite this long, but
It's interesting. I never really have had an author say to me before that writing was a break from real life. But then I think back to an attorney author that I used to know. I won't name her, but she kept a motivating sign over her desk, which is publish or practice, meaning, you know, she'd have to go back to...
Mine would be publish or drain anal glands, one or the other.
Right, okay. Anyway, The Last Odyssey is a truly remarkable book.
Thank
in
you.
the sense that, well, all the reasons that your books are normally, I think, sensational, but I particularly like this story. I like the journey that everybody's taking, and I like the fact that because the Iliad and the Odyssey, Homer's works, are part of the template for this whole
Yep.
plot, that if you think of a book, a story as a journey, then you've got a double journey here going on. The one that you're putting Sigma Force and everybody through from the beginning to the end of the book, but also referring back to Odysseus and whatever he did or didn't actually do. What got you interested in that?
You know, I've always wanted two things. Number one, I always wanted to send Sigma to hell. So I was always looking for that story to send them to hell. Didn't know exactly how to approach it, so it was in the back of my mind for probably a decade. So I'm looking for that story. I'm not sure how I can, you know, make any sense to send them to hell. And then I was reading about some work by a British management consultant named Robert Biddleston. He had an avid fascination with Homer's work. He was determined to find the real location of the hometown of Odysseus, which was in Homer's book. He travels from, after the fall of Troy, he has a 10-year voyage to get home to Ithaca. He's blown off course, he meets gods, monsters, witches, curses. And for the longest period of time, everybody thought Troy was mythic until Heinrich Schliemann discovered it in the late, I got the name right this time.
You did get the name right this time.
I realized why I said Howard. I'm thinking, for some reason, I'm thinking Howard Carter, who did develop, you know.
The two now common.
So anyways.
What Jim is referring to is we've done a podcast, which you can also listen to on poisonpen.com, our website. You can click on podcast. And at that point, we called him Herman, right?
Howard. Because
Schliemann.
I, for some reason, I got archaeologist and Howard and Heinrich mixed up. Anyways.
Right.
So for a long time, everybody thought it was mythic. Heinrich Schliemann, late 19th century, following clues in Homer's books, decided that he was pretty sure this is where he thought Troy was located, in a hill called Hisarlik, I think it is.
Right.
I never heard it pronounced out loud. And dug into it, found some ruins. Over about another few years, almost a decade, they finally sort of confirmed that probably is Troy. So suddenly, myth became history. So that was in the back of my mind, and then just recently I was reading about Robert Biddleson, again a British management consultant. He again following clues in Homer's Odyssey. He was looking for the homeland, the home city of Odysseus, where he ends his journey. And Ithaca, there actually is an island called Ithaca, and a lot of people just sort of assumed that's what it was, but it didn't match. The description of Ithaca in Homer's book did not match the physical island of Ithaca in Greece. So there was a disparity. And so Robert Biddlestone, just again, British management consultant, no archaeology background, he used modern geological tools to analyze Homer's work and modern geology and found an exact match. And it's on the peninsula of Peliki in Greece. The terrain matches exactly what Homer describes. And again, it took a little while for historians and archaeologists to accept that, but now it's sort of readily accepted that it probably is Ithaca. So suddenly now, after reading that, I'm thinking, well, Troy was mythic, now history. Ithaca was myth, now history. So we have the starting point of Odysseus' journey and the end point of Odysseus' journey now seem to be based in history. But what about everything in between? So I started looking to find out, are there other locations mentioned in Homer's Odyssey that have real-world locations? And I was not the first one to do that. The very first one was from the 1st century A.D., the Greek historian Strabo.
Mm-hmm.
He was fervently believed that Homer was relating real events, and then just put a layer of a fanciful story on top of it, but it was actually describing real places and real events. And so his goal when he wrote a book, it's a 2,000-page treatise called Geographica, where he was trying to pin down where in the Mediterranean might be those mythic spots described in Homer's Odyssey. He was not probably correct. Once time passes, we get better information, and we know that some of the things he thought he was describing were not accurate. But to this day, the Geographica, this 2,000-page treatise, is still considered to be a wonderful ancient travelogue of the Mediterranean, because he journeyed, he described it greatly. And over the years, many other people have tried to assign locations to Homer's Odyssey. So I thought, well, everybody else is doing it, I'm going to do it too. So my goal was to go through the Mediterranean. I went to Greece, to Italy, to the island of Sardinia, to the coast of Spain, looking to see if I can, these were some of the places people thought might be references to Homer. So I went there to see, what I could talk to historians, talk to archaeologists, try to piece together basically a big Mediterranean adventure. This story pretty much starts in eastern Mediterranean on the coast of Turkey at Troy, and then ends up all the way at the other side. I'm not going to say where it ends up, in not Yellowstone. It ends up somewhere else on the other side of the Mediterranean.
You are never going to let me live down
to.
Yellowstone, are you? It's going to echo forever when I gave away. He's referring back to a book where when we started talking, I actually gave away the keystone of the plot.
The Devil Colony.
Right.
The big mystery she reveals to the crowd.
Yep.
So I'm not going to reveal a mystery of where they end up. But again, at one point in Homer's journey, he does visit Tartarus, the Greek version of hell. He speaks to some spirits of somebody that he lost during this voyage. He speaks to his mother. And so my goal then was to find out, can I correlate a true place that could be the Greek version of hell, Tartarus? And that was my goal in writing the novel, was to...
Well, I think you did a masterful job. We might want to start out, too, by saying that Homer is probably a mythical person.
Oh, yeah.
And what we think happened is that there was an accretion of stories, oral histories and so forth, that eventually became written down. or codified in, quote, Homer. Not any different maybe than the Icelandic sagas or what the Portuguese have, what is it, the Lusiads or whatever, I can't remember how to pronounce it. But that doesn't mean that the stories aren't real, even if they were not written down. And I remember, Jim, when we went to, I think it was in 2010, we were in Egypt and went over to Jordan, and we had a tour of some of the biblical sites in Jordan. They're just right together. I mean, it's such a small geographic area.
Right, it is.
If you're floating in the Dead Sea on the Jordan side, you can see Jerusalem. I mean, you can see the lights and so forth up there. So what seemed like these enormously distant lands or hours of days, weeks of travel, by today's standards are minuscule, but were real then.
Yeah, to them, the known world, was basically, the circumference of the Mediterranean, the people, the different civilizations around the edge of the Mediterranean.
However, interestingly enough, Jim starts this book in Greenland under a glacier. How come we did that?
Well, I decided that we had to have a little adventure, so I had to build a story. So what we discover at the beginning of this novel, not ruining anything, it's right at the beginning, is the discovery of a centuries-old medieval ship that's buried a half a mile underneath the ice of Greenland. Greenland's ice cap is melting, the meltwater channel opens, a pair of researchers go in there, they discover this ancient ship. They don't feel capable of doing a true analysis of what's there, so they call in some experts. The experts come, they discover within the hold of the ship some artifacts that are both wondrous and horrific. The wondrous is in the captain's quarters, they discover a large gold map with a silver astrolabe that's embedded in the map. And the astrolabe in the device, which is actually, it's mechanical, it moves, and it seems to point towards the location of Tartarus, the Greek version of hell. Word spreads, zealots come out to steal this, and that's where Sigma gets pulled in, is to find out who stole the artifact, why did they want it, what is their intent behind that, and that leads to the big Mediterranean adventure from one side to the other while they try to figure out what's going on.
Well, it certainly is important to have a reason for Sigma to be doing anything.
It's always good. I mean, usually
Right.
they're. I mean, what I like about this book, it's fun to. One of the joys of writing a series, being this is the 15th book in the series, and not that you have to read them in order. I don't think anybody's read them in order but me. Is that?
And me.
Oh, you read them in order. Great.
Sure, I read you in real time.
Excellent. Me and her, the only
Right,
ones.
we're together.
So is that you get a broader look over a cast of characters' lives than you can in a single volume. So Map of Bones is the first volume where Gray meets Seishan. They shoot each other. 15 books later, they're married. They're not married, but they're
Partners.
cohabitating.
They are partners, right?
And they have a child, Jack, the little boy. And so it's fun to try to answer questions like, what type of father would Gray be? What does he do during his parental leave if he's not working for Sigma? How does Seishan, this former assassin, treat motherhood? So it was fun to explore that in the novel, and again, just trying to see how them juggling their professional, personal lives. Another thing that's unique in this novel is that there's one character that has not appeared as a point of view character very often. Matter of fact, he's only appeared as a point of view character once before in the Sigma series, and that's Kowalski. Kowalski had a point of view in the book Bone Labyrinth, mostly because that book dealt with Neanderthals, so I thought it was very appropriate to have Kowalski have a point of view if I'm dealing with a book about Neanderthals. And since I was sending Sigma to hell, I definitely wanted to get Kowalski's viewpoint on what that experience was like. So this book is very unique, and there's some twists and turns for everybody involved. So it's fun not just to deal with the adventure and the history, but actually to shine a sharper light into their lives. So it's been a great deal of fun to craft.
Well, really what's happened is as you've created characters, they've become not only real, but family. And so every book that you write is an ongoing family saga, even if there are specific and concrete adventures in each book.
Yeah,
the overall story is much, much broader.
I had an interviewer a couple days ago ask me, do I have any difficulty getting back into these characters? Because usually different books I shine a different light on a different set of characters. The last book was a lot with Monk and Cat. This book a lot with Kowalski, Gray, and Seishan. So the spotlight shifts a little bit. And he was asking me, do you have any difficulty shifting that spotlight? Do you have to sort of does it take you time to get back into that character? And my answer is no. I've been living them now for 15 books. I mean, they live and breathe in somewhere in my brain, and it's very easy just to jump right into it. The hard thing is to not overwhelm a reader by having too many points of view. So I generally want to get Monk's opinion about something, but it's not. Keep that light focused where it needs to be focused.
You always want to be moving the story along.
Yeah.
You and I talked when we did our podcast about Clive Cussler, who is, for those of you who don't know Clive, who died last month. We've been his home bookstore for almost 30 years, and very much enjoy adventure writing, not necessarily just crime fiction or a thriller, but I don't know that you could classify Clive's books as anything in particular, but he was always focused on moving the story and entertaining people. He never pretended to any literary aspirations. My favorite thing that Clive ever wrote, I've always loved this, I don't know if I told you this, he was in advertising before he became a novelist, and he wrote the Ajax foaming cleanser line, which I remember as a kid. Ajax, the foaming cleanser, floats the dirt right down the drain. But I think that...
I did not know that.
You didn't know that, okay. But I've always thought that Dorothy Sayers came from advertising. There have been a few authors who have. But I've always thought that Clive was incredibly pragmatic about being Clive, about writing and so forth. But he had really focused always on getting the message across, doing the entertainment. He was sort of an idol for you, wasn't he?
I mean, I grew up reading Clive Cussler, and just the first time I got a chance to interview him, I remember being tongue-tied the entire time, and just I couldn't look at him directly in the eye. It was like looking into the face of God across the table. Not only was I enamored of his writing, and I always tell people that people say, what's your goal when you write the novel? And my goal is what Clive's goal is, to entertain. I want you laughing and crying and your heart pumping, a little pebble sweat on your brow when you're reading one of my novels, just the way I experienced with reading Clive's novels. But also he shined light into, most of his novels have a historical basis and some history that he's illuminating in the course of one of his novels, which, as you well know, is those fingerprints from Clive are all over what I do today. I wouldn't be writing what I write today if I wasn't that I was reading Clive when I was young. And when I was getting the very first blurb I ever got for one of my novels was from Clive, because most people maybe don't know how generous he is to other authors. You might think, oh, he's this godlike figure who never comes down from Mount Olympus. But no, he is, he's in the trenches. He loves to reach down and pull an author out of obscurity. He's always welcome with a blurb. He's just a great generosity of spirit, besides being a great author.
Very true. We are certainly going to miss him. He's also a great reader.
Yeah.
And I think, don't you think you have to be a great reader to be an author?
Oh, definitely. Like I always say, I had no formal training in writing. I've never had an English lit class. I've never had anything. When I went to college, I was going to be a vet, so that was my career track. Nothing else was going to deviate from that. But I read a lot, and I read a lot now. I still think the greatest way to learn to write is to read. Read whatever genre. Number one, write what you love to read. Don't chase the market. A lot of authors think, oh, well, that's popular, I'm going to write that. But if you're not passionate about what that book that you're writing, if you're not passionate about the material, the genre, readers have great noses. They're going to sense this. They just can sense when there's not that passion behind that.
I agree with you, but I will also say that one of the things that I always enjoyed about reading Clive, and I certainly enjoy about reading you, is there is some real technology involved. Clive really understood ships. He was extremely good at getting the factual stuff right and the technology stuff right. He just never let it overwhelm the pace of the story.
Sure.
And I think that you enjoy the history and the technology parts as much as you enjoy the moving the story forward with the
definitely.
adventure.
I mean, I've always have to, when it comes to that final edit, usually it's a lot of
Delete.
cutting away.
Yes.
I'm fascinated by it, but I realize it's not serving the story anymore. It's slowing the story down. It might be interesting, but it's not serving the novel.
I think that's true, but you also managed to write, some fairly extensive author note or whatever.
Oh yeah,
it
at
is,
the end I have the what's true,
which is great.
I'm going to lay down, exactly what I'm making up and what's real, and I do that for two reasons. Number one is to avoid 1,000 questions about the same topic, because a lot of, I'm going to start the story fairly grounded. I'm going to take you somewhere pretty weird, but a lot of people think that line between the real and the weird is like right near the end, but not oftentimes. It's very different. So I got tired of answering questions. Is this real? Is that real? So I decided to lay it down at the end. I also did it because I got at one point a 1-star Amazon review. Now, I've got many 1-star Amazon reviews, but this one particularly irked me because it was this reviewer was saying that this part of the I was really in the story with Jim. Loved the story. It was just clicking along away, but I reached this part of the story and this is what happened, and it's too outlandish. I just couldn't accept that could possibly be real. And I'm thinking, when I read that, but that is real. I'm going to take you over here where I'm stretching things a little bit, but right, the part that you're having problems with is real, because sometimes, like I said, truth is stranger than fiction. And so I thought, well, I'm going to let people know exactly how much of the story is factual and how much is of my own imagination. But I also do it to leave breadcrumbs. Is if there's any aspect of the science, the history that might intrigue somebody, then at the back of the book, I'm going to leave you some breadcrumbs to follow if you want to do your own journeying.
I'm not a reader of dystopian fiction. I've always found that the world was hard enough
Now you're living it.
as it is. But I have to say that I'm not having read it, I'm just sort of guessing that I'm not sure that you could have written a dystopian novel any stranger than what we are currently living in. And certainly people writing political thrillers could never make up the stuff that's been happening all around the world. It is true that truth is weirder than fiction, and I've always thought that fiction helped us make sense of it. That's one of the reasons I love biography. I'm actually a romance and biography reader as much as I am a crime reader. I've always thought that biography was a way of helping to understand someone's life and put it in context differently than an autobiography, which is necessarily from the person writing the autobiography's point of view, whereas a biography has a broader perspective and can look at stuff, and oftentimes, as I say, helps you make sense of times and of a life. I think it'll be interesting maybe 5 years down the road. I've had authors say this to me, that they hope they live long enough or have careers long enough to write about the world we've been through in the last few years.
It's been a journey, that's for sure.
It really has. I was born in 1940, and I was always grateful that I had missed the 30s. And I never expected to actually live through the 30s, but I feel that that's what we've been doing for a while all over the world. Curiously, the front decade or two of every century since 1500s has been a time of enormous turmoil and resetting. I mean, if you think back on it, just go back, 19th century, Napoleonic Wars, 20th century, we had, World War
I.
In the 18th century, we had the South Sea Bubble and the whole clash between Britain and France and so forth. I wonder if it's just, a normal kind of a curve for things to consolidate and then splinter and then recoalesce. And the hard part is living through the splinter part, because you don't know how it comes out. You can read Jane Austen today or Regency novels, and that that in the end Wellington won at Waterloo, and how. But if you were somebody in Britain living through a 20-year war, you would not have any real expectation of how it came out. Same thing with the Blitz or World War II. Nobody knew until it was over how it was going to come out.
And I mean, this past week has been tumultuous for me because every day I wake up, my release is changing in regards to, first Tucson Festival of Books canceled. Then I was supposed to be at WonderCon in April, that got canceled. Then it was some library events got canceled, and there was this bookstore and that bookstore got canceled. So every time I woke up, there was something different, and it feels like that's the way the world's going to be for a while.
I think it will be for a while. I find it really interesting that we began doing virtual events so long ago because Scottsdale is a tourist destination, and 70% of you customers don't live in Arizona. So how were we going to reach you? But it never occurred to me that we had been spending years sort of building up to the moment when, in fact, we have the technology in place to do what you and I are doing, which is a channel to all of you who are watching this for Jim to speak to you and talk to you about his book. And speaking of channels, Harlan Coben reminded me to do this the other day when we were doing his virtual event. You can buy an autographed copy of The Last Odyssey by going to poisonedpen.com, clicking on our web store, and ordering the book. The link is also on Jim's website. And I will add that HarperCollins, I'll just sort of pull it up here.
I'll show it.
Okay. HarperCollins made a little collectible
it.
insert here, as they have done for your books now for several years.
They have, yeah.
And you can only get it if you buy one of our copies here from the Poison Pen. So that is my...
It's a fun little giveaway because it's hard. I don't know if you can quite appreciate the sort of the watermark into this old piece of paper here, and it's repeated here. Now they might look like they're the same image, but they are not. And why they're different ties back to deep into the history of Sigma, and then plays out in a role in this book today. So you'll get a little peek of that when you read the book.
Also, for those of you who may go to our Instagram.com/poisonpenbookstore, I have a really interesting photograph of astrolabe reconstructed in a very modern form of steel at St. John's College in Santa Fe, New Mexico.
They're beautiful. I mean,
they are.
They're works of art.
So I'm going to post that again on Instagram. So if any of you would like to see what an astrolabe looked like, it's a very big version, and you can see it there. Anything else that have you had questions addressed to you from fans that this might be a good moment to answer?
Sure. Repetitively, I get asked, when are you going to see the return of Tucker Wayne and his military war dog Kane?
When are we going to see Tucker Wayne and his military war dog Kane? I can hardly wait, actually.
That will be this September. In September is coming out an anthology of my short fiction. It's called Unrestricted Access. It's all of my short stories I've written over the last 20 years that have been spread and dispersed, and some are very hard to find, now are collated into one volume. I do now new introductions to the stories because I'm using the stories almost like a little journey through my history of a writer. I describe why I told the story at that point in my career, what I learned from that story, where I got the ideas from that story. But on top of that, I didn't want to just sell you old stuff, so I wrote a novella. It's about a 100-page short story, 100-page mini novel, featuring Tucker and Kane, which just happens to all take place in Sedona.
Wow, an Arizona story. Well, I think that we can expect to have autographed copies once again of that volume, and either we will have Jim at the Poison Pen, or we will have Jim doing a virtual event again.
I'm sure I can easily make the journey down here.
I certainly hope so.
Especially since it takes place in Sedona. If I'm going one stop, I should come here.
So, do you have fans asking about some of you've written some standalones before you began to write Sigma, Subterranean, and so forth. Do you have people asking if you are going to...
All the time.
Okay.
If I'm going to do more standalones. I don't have anything in the pipeline right now that I'm going to write. I am doing a new, going back to my old roots. Back when I first started my career, I was doing a fantasy novel under a different pen name and a Rollins thriller every year. So I am returning to create a new fantasy series. The first book will be out in summer of 2021.
a new fantasy series, but this will be different than the one you wrote with Rebecca, which had some interesting supernatural
This is
elements.
going to be more high fantasy. I'll get more details down the line, but so that's coming up.
Okay.
I'm now currently I'm finishing up the next Sigma novel, which is the title is The Savage Zone, and the science of that is all about a topic you're probably going to be tired about by the time my book comes out. It's all about virology. It's all about viruses. It's not a pandemic novel. It's more a deep dive into the biology history of viruses on this planet. So many cool stuff in there. I'll give you one example, one little factoid to whet your appetite on how unusual viruses are, is that what people might not know is that every single day, every single hour, every single minute, viruses are raining down out of the sky because they're swept up and they rain down. How many? Basically every square yard, about the size of this table here, every day, 800 million viruses rain down into every square meter of the earth. So you're not going to Clorox your way out of this situation. So be careful every time you take a deep breath. Think of the 800 million viruses you're inhaling.
Raining down from where?
They're cast up by the winds. They're carried in the upper atmosphere, and then sometimes they'll spend decades up in the upper atmosphere. And finally, there's maybe a pressure change that occurs that all of a sudden will dump all these viruses down onto the system.
I have read that the deforestation of the Amazon may have unleashed some viruses or other
Sure.
things that were contained.
The Amazon is just a huge biological test tube. It's just there's so much competition for the meager resources, and the Amazon looks like it's rich, but actually it's surviving on fairly meager resources. That's why when they clear cut a section of the rainforest, they can probably farm that ground for maybe a season or two, and then it's gone because there's not that much nutrients. So everybody's competing, and because of that competition, they basically chemical warfare is going on there, biological warfare is going on in that jungle. So when we get in there, when we shake that bush, horrible things can come out as a consequence.
The final question that I should ask you, because everybody always wants to know, is there anything interesting going on in terms of film or video?
Nothing concrete. The film rights to the whole entire Sigma series were renewed by the company that audits. They just renewed for another chunk of time.
Mm-hmm.
They're sort of shifting between either trying to construct a series based on the series or going to full feature film. They're still on that deciding line where they want to, which way they want to
Sigma
fall.
would be an extremely expensive thing to film.
It would be.
Thinking about this particular book, but then I was watching the second Jack Ryan, which I thought had, frankly, really weak storytelling, but was all over Venezuela and had some really great stuff. So apparently there are budgets that exist, to do this kind of thing.
Well, I think it'd be hard to pare down, one of my novels, I think, into a 90-minute, 2-hour film.
Yes.
Fundamentally, I think it would work better as a series, just to try to, that way you can have one season per book. I think there's probably enough in a novel to fill out an entire season.
I agree. Actually, I've gotten kind of addicted to serialized stories on television when I'm
Me too.
tired all day. It's a nice break to sit down and watch something, and they range anywhere from like 2 or 3 to 12 episodes, and you can certainly do a whole different storytelling line when you've got that room, and you can explore your different characters and your different families. So I can see one of your standalone novels making maybe a killer movie, but I think that Sigma almost surely deserves serial television as opposed to films.
I would love that. People often ask me, well, when is it going to happen? And I always tell people, the author is the last one generally to hear much information. I expect I will find out if there's a television series when I see the commercial for it. So I'll probably find
or
out.
you get a check and you get to take it to
That's
the
true.
bank.
That's,
Right. Anything else you want to talk about?
Just be safe out there. I did a little Facebook Live event back in on was it Thursday, and I pulled a copy of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. Hitchhiker's Guide is an actual physical guide in the story, in the novel. It's a physical book that has instructions on how to survive journeys through the galaxy. And imprinted onto the book are the words, "Don't panic." So that is my lesson for today. There's a lot of scary stuff going on. Just take a deep breath. Pretend you didn't hear that 800 million viruses that are raining down out of the sky. Just take a deep breath. Keep a little distance. Wash your hands.
And read more, because books are actually a fabulous escape.
That's one thing I just love about that. Remember the old days when you used to fly in an airplane? You had nothing. The only thing you could do was read, because in life you often was pulled in so many different directions. When I got on a plane, it's like, I have work to do, but I can't do it. So I get to read for X number of hours. That's, if there's any silver lining in the tragedy that's going on today, is now's a great time to catch up on some reading. I got a pile of books I need to get through.
I think that's true. The pace of modern life is such, and the distractions are such, that actually sitting down to read for any prolonged period has become hard. We're also tethered to our phones and obligations, but maybe it's a good time for just a general reset. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you again soon.